During my time at Bain & Company, I was once staffed on a project to help an international alcohol player enter India. So the first step for me, before I actually start doing the analysis, was to plan the analysis. I did a little bit of research and found out that there were 5 potential routes that my client can take to enter India. The first way was a greenfield entry. Greenfield entry is nothing but starting from the scratch, building own distribution, own brands, own production facilities. The second option was setting up a brownfield operation, which is acquiring existing production facilities to make new production facilities. The third step was doing an alliance. Alliance is nothing but partnering with an existing entity on using things such as licensing. It's a non-binding agreement. The fourth way is a joint venture. A joint venture is when 2 entities come together and form a third entity with its own set of operations. And then the fifth and the final way was to actually acquire an existing player in the Indian market. So I took this 5 set of pieces to my partner, agreed with him, and I knew that this is where I had to start my analysis. What was I effectively doing? I was effectively building a hypothesis on how to solve my problem. A hypothesis is nothing but a structured way of planning your analysis. What is the most important characteristic of a good hypothesis? The most important characteristic is mece, M-E-C-E, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. All it means is a collection of elements which are non-overlapping and together form the universe. Let's actually take a simple example to understand mece. Let's say your client was facing declining revenues and he had to build a hypothesis on how to evaluate the reason of declining revenues. The first way or the first reason is declining volumes. The second reason is fewer customers, and the third reason is declining prices. Is this a mece framework? No. It's exhaustive because it talks about volume and price both, but it overlaps. The declining volume and fewer customers effectively means the same thing. Then what is a good hypothesis for a problem such as this? A good hypothesis would include volume and price. The reason could be for volumes to decline, fewer customers, fewer order size per customer, or on prices, the reason could be declining prices. So these are the reasons why the revenues could be declining. And this is a mece framework which talks about both volume and price and does not overlap. If it makes easy for you to remember, keep in mind mece is an opposite of mece. Mece, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. But it may not always be intuitive to build a hypothesis such as this. Sometimes the situation can be much more complex. Let's take a rather difficult example. On another assignment at Bain & Company, I was working for an agricultural player. The agricultural player heard from its customers that starch is a phenomenal market to enter. And obviously, the client reached out to me for recommendations on starch. What do you think was my first question? My first question in my mind was, how does starch look? I had no idea about this industry. But because I had no idea about this industry, it was even more important that I structure my thoughts, I develop a hypothesis to plan the analysis before I actually do the analysis. I started to do some quick research. I spoke to some experts and found out that there were 3 questions I had to answer. I had to understand what are the sources of producing starch products. Second, I had to understand what are those products that my client had to produce. And then finally, what customers does my client serve? If you step back, you'd realize that effectively this forms a value chain. Sources, products, customers. And always remember, when you don't know what a starting point is, value chain is always a good idea. Value chains are always mece. But I knew that this wasn't enough for me to develop the hypothesis, and I had to flesh this out even further. So I did some more research to understand what exactly is under sources, under products, and under customers. For this particular module, let me actually try and explain what I did in customers. I found out that there were two customers that my client could serve. There were the B2B customers, the corporate customers, or there could be the B2C customers, which is the retail customers. And I found out that within B2B, there were three big industries that use starch: food, textile, and paper. So I developed my structure, my hypothesis tree, helping the client enter India in the starch market, understanding the sources, understanding the products, understanding the customers, within customers B2B, B2C, and within B2B food, textile, and paper. These were the things that I had to do during my analysis. The next step for me was really to take this to the partner, agree with him that this was the right hypothesis, and then plan my analysis, source data, source benchmarks, and develop recommendations. So you realize that building a hypothesis may not always be intuitive, but it's extremely effective. You want to do a good hypothesis because you want to make sure that when you make progress, you don't make mistakes and you don't have to come back. Developing a good hypothesis, a mece hypothesis, will help you get to your analysis in the first go. Or otherwise, you might have to go, do the analysis, come back, revisit your hypothesis. It's like a snakes and ladders problem. You don't want to get to 98 and then come back to 2. But at the same time, my colleagues, I have made multiple mistakes in developing the hypothesis. So don't be afraid of developing the hypothesis. Develop it, you'll make mistakes, learn from it. Next time you will develop an even better hypothesis. It's an art, and you have to master it over time.